So how do you make 0 and 1 balance out so that you can break free from all these cycles? The 1111 put 0 as the reflection, 1 looking at 1, self looking at self, and the 0 point is directly in the center. So when 1 equals 0, with the center point directly in the middle, one lateral ventricle facing the other, the self looking at the self, you find the pineal gland in the middle. And you find a way to finally have symphony rather than discord between the two hemispheres. The unbalanced equation was the reason why the left and the right hemispheres of the brain were unable to communicate. The left and the right hemispheres of the brain have previously been referred to as the master and his emissary. They've been working separately within the same cranium for a long time, and the lack of communication between the two had caused further and further polarity, and the polarity, ended up becoming like a battery, and the battery became a cycle, and the cycles became cycles and circuitry, and you can look further into that if you want to, into Chronos and the moon, and, the moon matrix and all these types of things. They're basically just cyclical patterns that we would get stuck in over and over and over. And you can apply that to the very biggest sum of parts to the very smallest sum of parts. You can look at anything from the electromagnetic fields of the heart all the way up to the expansion and contraction of the universe. You can look in any direction you want to. You're going to see the cycles of Saturn. You're going to see the cycles that we've been stuck in so long. At any rate, we are facing an update. I'm not sure when, but people have been saying that this update that had been talked about for a while of the human being receiving 2 spines and 4 hemispheres of the brain was something that I feared up until very recently, because I knew that the 2 hemispheres that we had were not communicating with each other. So the idea of having 4 hemispheres, 2 verbal, 2 non-verbal, that weren't going to be able to communicate with each other sounded like a nightmare. It sounded like we were going to get more disassociated and more confused than ever, that it was just going to bring sorrow. But right at the pinnacle of me being upset by this, because, when a Mandela effect happens, it just happens upon you, and I wasn't looking forward to that one, the balance came in the equation between the 2 hemispheres. Since now we've found the 0 point that a lot of you already know about, but now we've found exactly the self facing the self, being humbled by the self, and how you can find the 0 point to make 0 and 1 balance out. The answer was found by the right hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain, the mathematical side, would never have been able to solve this equation, because if you come at it from a mathematical angle, it can never be solved. It will always be unbalanced, and you'll go through a huge effort to try and balance it out, and you just have to reset and reset and reset and reset, and that's been happening to our reality. And now what we have, like I said, is God has woken up the right hemisphere of the brain first. And now the left hemisphere of the brain is going to follow shortly. When the 2 are working in unison and the 2 become 4, we're going to be facing into a much more positive prospect for the future. I'll link down below to my previous theories where I was talking about the attributes of the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain being connected to the different arms of the Milky Way, so that we could more clearly see how this will impact us. How the Orion arm is more like the left hemisphere of the brain, and the Sagittarius arm has more attributes of the right side of the brain. But what we're seeing is the people who are Mandela affected are people who have attributes, creative attributes, who are basically like the right side of the brain, like the right hemisphere, but they're existing in the left hemisphere in Orion. And likewise, the people who are more embodying the left hemisphere are stuck in the Sagittarius arm. What we need to bring everything back together, I believe, was this balancing of equations. And I think that's why the 0 equaling 1 came at the same kind of time that we got a lot of confirmation about timelines collapsing in the Sagittarius arm. So again, working on theory, I'm hoping that a lot of things can converge back together now that this kind of discord between the two hemispheres, the two creative hemispheres, the two sides of what we seem to be dealing with, and this is built and based upon observations. Now that we found the 0 point, I'm hoping that everything can come back together and be perhaps even easier or better than it was before. But we can't colour in the blank construct, the grey, I should say, grey demure construct of the Orion arm, without help from the other hemisphere. So I believe this world that we're in right now will get less weird as things converge and come back together over time. Thank you very much.